understanding anyway, but I don't know how close he is to full retirement.
Yeah.
I get the sense that he likes it, he does an awfully good job. And
Yeah, yeah. He's stuck it out through thick and thin. That's the thing. Trained everyone else and then they go off and,
made big bucks someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
he's a good guy.
And very, and very, you know, you talk to other officers, other chiefs, and they, a lot of people respect him.
Absolutely. Yep.
Does a good job, and, you know, just the maybe community policing before it was a thing,
No doubt.
so.
Well, Ed did community selectmen before it was a thing.
Yeah, that's true.
He's really nice when he pulls you over too.
I won't ask
No,
what
I'm
he's
kidding,
doing.
I'm kidding.
Do you have a wifey? No.
Well, I'm
He's
surprised
been
you
here
didn't
for
get
me,
his
so I
own
don't
down
have-
Burn Street.
Is it just
No,
one?
I
Oh,
get
that
this-
was several.
What's that?
And Roberts Road.
Roberts Road,
They often run.
right, right at the fire station.
I don't think they've been doing that as much.
Oh, really?
Hi Deanna, how are you?
I don't think anybody's here yet.
I don't think we have
Isn't-
seats,
no.
so.
I know, although yet we sit in the same seat. I know I do, I sit in the same seat every meeting.
I have not heard, and I haven't heard from John either,
I'm
so.
gonna ask you a question, I can't remember what it was. Oh, it was Fourth Street, so that narrows it down a little bit.
Did he take some food?
You know, I don't know.
Because I guess, don't we need to put
What
someone
We
in
was it?
do need to put some.
Sonny's spot permanently?
Yeah.
Because we had elections last time, or semi, when was Sonny off?
Talked to Chris last night, he said, you really care about mushrooms? I said, no.
And he said that he had an agreement with you that he wasn't going to.
Right?
He's gonna come for a year.
So they all have to.
No, he's
No.
going to, still stay off, but he'd come back.
He talked to
Needed.
Donna,
I
and
don't
Donna
know.
said.
If
"I
needed
gotta
as an
skip you."
alternate or
As an
something,
alternate,
I don't
okay,
know.
fine.
So we need to figure that out
We
and just
need to.
elect someone for the duration of his term.
She didn't know.
I don't think we elect.
Yeah, that's why I said.
Well,
we did. I said, well, we'll take it.
Appoint.
By the-
Right.
Oh, the
So-
board, okay, so we might need to let
Yeah,
them know.
we need to
See
recruit
if
somebody.
Ken,
to-
if
Chris-
Ken wants to.
Well, that's
fill in,
good,
or-
because I showed a
Is it
3
Paul
foot.
still?
I'll
Paul
check.
still
alternate?
is, I
And
think
then
Paul
Mike called me, he's like, yeah, Darlene doesn't want to
either
do that.
recused
I was like,
or was unable
He
to.
had,
Okay.
yeah, he had something else. He had
I'm getting a little
conflicts.
tired of being paid to do this.
But he's
10
an
times,
alternate?
Yeah.
He's-
Okay,
Yeah,
so he's
that
an
discussion
alternate,
with
so I
him
guess
today,
it's
so-
between the two of them of who.
Well, we moved it.
Wants
and
to.
we had
Thank
do
you
this,
for
and
this.
You had very preliminary stuff.
Where'd you find that?
And we're not even
That
State
close to doing the
No,
real
it's
deal.
the hardware store.
You have to do the real deal.
Right.
Oh, really? Rockies?
Yeah.
I tried to-
I love hardware
One-
That's his favorite place to go. He
I
finds
said, the
anything he
path
wants
you were
to.
headed down,
Oh, I just
Okay.
love
Was
walking
to
around Hyde.
push your way through
It's
approvals
still there.
and get to construction.
I know.
And it
I
was
actually
then-
like the one in downtown too. 'Cause
Yeah.
They have some good parking, but Rockies has even better parking,
Yeah.
so.
I worked there in high school. Did you see the
Yeah.
Navy hardware?
Yes,
Where is
oh
it?
my
Right.
God. Now, you were,
Everything's
when you
good.
were in service
Everything's good.
merchandise, that was,
Everything's good.
I
Yeah.
had gone before,
Yeah.
you're pretty
So
young.
They
aren't
said
you?
we don't do the boundary line.
So I went to high school in '92, and I went to Navy.
Right.
And then I moved back in 2000.
I think service merchandise was gone in 90.
Well, it was like,
Is Mike
they were planning.
trying to do her a favor or?
No, I think you.
Okay. Yeah,
Back over the Rockies.
yeah, yeah, and the bigger, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, he's- understands the benefit of moving money.
Yeah, I just.
What's great about it is he understands how to put a building like that together.
Yeah, if I'm taking.
No, no.
We don't have our commission together.
You got the, lease of, natural gas for the general.
Oh, wow.
So, just to, as a heads up,
That's
I was
huge.
gonna send
Yep.
out an application
because he was talking about
Yeah.
underground
So
storage
the
fuel
first one
tanks and everything
is,
else.
who bought, the guy who bought the big property that is Silver Shake. Yeah, no, he was closing the next day, so he came for, like, just a and he has some applications, so he's gonna subdivide. The project's fine, I'm just saying.
Hey, John.
Now, is this Bennett's part?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then,
We have Ken.
another
Doors,
person
couple more
came
minutes.
at,
It's some Rose something. It's
Okay.
Is that a commercial property
It's one of those things where I'm not sure anybody will be
there?
able to follow.
Okay.
You know,
Jim Walcott bought it and he sold it to,
but it's not in general.
Yeah, right.
Because, well, he came in.
No, I haven't started yet, so.
No.
Hi, guys. How you doing?
Hi.
What are you doing?
Very good, how are you?
Good.
So I think that there may be a little bit like missing.
Good.
What I don't know.
Thanks. I bought it from you today.
Did you really?
Well, Saturday, I have to show the phones. Oh, no. It's gonna.
Throw things out
Are we ready? We are ready. We're ready?
Yes.
Okay, so, good evening, it's 7 o'clock on May 14th. This is a continuation of a public hearing that was begun on April 14th, or April 16th, I guess. And we were in deliberations on the application of Mr. Turgeon, and I think FX, you suggested that we continue the hearing, and you wanted a chance to confer with your client and to see if there were any changes that they wanted to propose. And in the meantime, I've had a chance to do additional research and study into the OSI manual and the zoning ordinance, so I think I've got a better understanding of what the lay of the land is, no pun intended on the law, so. Do you have anything
Yes.
to add to the record?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is FX Bruton. I'm here with Kevin Turgeon, the owner of the property, and Chris Berry, Berry Serving Engineering. And Chris will confirm an issue that I misunderstood, so it's good that he's here because it will be helpful, I think, in terms of the concerns raised. So the gist of what we were doing again was taking two lots, agreeing to merge them, and then proposed a duplex. We, I won't rehash everything, but we did go to the planning board and then did find it to be an appropriate location for this proposed use. So that was kind of what I look at as, in a sense, that was a tough case in terms of not their decision, but as part of the criteria that we all need to look at. They had one of the toughest tasks. They came back with a favorable position in that regard. But what I wanted to do was I was listening to the board, and I wanted to present some issues to Mr. Turgeon, who was actually away, and then see if we could address those. And maybe we can, in a more collaborative way, come up with the plan that might work. So generally speaking, one of the issues was there's a lot going on. What I had proposed or highlighted was that this is really a second lot, would go away. This is the buffer that we would stay away from, which I think we all agree is good. What we did was a proposed driveway at the time, and if you look at the old plan, The old plan had 2 garage spaces and basically 2 driveway areas. What we did was we eliminated one of those, so we've come to a smaller garage area, if you will, and a smaller driveway. So further decreasing any impact to the environment. One of the other things that there was discussion about was we'd like to see a fence. So what we proposed is actually a black chain link fence that goes from the driveway all the way around the entirety of what I'll refer to as the curtilage, which is the yard. It kind of blocks off the access to the other portions of the property, further cementing the kind of impact we might have to the environmental aspects of either the buffer or the wetland. The other thing I asked the client and Chris about was this proposed tree line. This is a cut-to line. These are existing trees, so these would stay. And this would, again, be the yard. If you look at the aerial photo that is right here, there's a vacant lot in the back that does have a shed. But what exists out here is not necessarily a lot of residential use. There's residential use here, I believe there's some, the owner plus maybe some renters there. This is just a garage or a barn, it's not a residential use. So we don't think that we're really overburdening the area. This, as I described earlier, is an existing right-of-way. They have it through the deed. So we think this is a fairly tempered down version of what was the original plan, which was 2 single-family house lots on these 2 lots, down to this modest proposal, which again is, I think, a byproduct of working with Mr. Krebs, working with the planning board, and even working with this board. I like to make a distinction between what each board is doing, and I think the planning board is looking at this plan in terms of its appropriateness, its location, and size, and I think they did do that. What the zoning board is looking at in this instance, different from your other cases, is kind of did we meet the other criteria, the other checklists? And I think we did, and I think the chair went through those pretty specifically, so I won't go through that, but all the setbacks in that DES septic. The one thing that Chris pointed out that was helpful to me that I didn't completely understand when I was here is there was some concern in this area where there was an elevation change. Granted, we have now the fence, but this elevation change actually doesn't go down, it goes up. So it creates a natural buffer as well. So it's not, I think the original concern was if this goes down, then someone kind of tumble down the hill, if you will. But it actually elevates and it goes up, and then again, we have the chain link fence on top of that. So we're hopeful that in terms of addressing what those concerns were, we've met the concerns that were raised. And again, we are asking only for a conditional use permit. We're not asking for a variance, excuse me, special exception, I apologize. Asking for a special exception, not a variance. And we think that this plan meets all the criteria that your ordinance outlines. And it also accomplishes a lot of good environmental things. Taking 2 non-conforming lots, making them more conforming, but staying well away from the wetlands and even the wetland buffer. So we appreciate the opportunity to present that. We're certainly here to answer any questions. Mr. Turgeon is, and Mr. Berry is as well. Thank
All
you.
right. Any questions from the board? Do you have a hand up there?
No, so, Mr. Berry, you amended this plan, but I note that you didn't take the reference that the driveway access easement was to be provided. That's still a reference on there.
That's to remain, so that's an easement that we're willing to provide to the abutting parties who actually use that area.
Okay, so you own the easement and you're willing to
That's right,
grant
that's
it
correct.
to the, I assume it's this barn back here?
Yeah, there are a few other users of the easement also, yes, yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so that hasn't been granted to the abutter yet?
Not as of yet, no.
Okay,
No.
Keep in mind that the abutter is Mr. Poplawski, who has by deed the right, or he has this easement right, and he also owns these properties, so it's one person.
right.
Questions from the board? So I'll propose this as a question, FX. As I mentioned at the start, I spent a lot of time with the OSI manual. I don't lightly, like, my colleagues on the board got me really thinking over the, over the interim while we were on continuance. They're smart people, they're fair-minded people, they look at the ordinance in a different way, perhaps a less legalistic way than I did, but their reaction to this was, we're putting a duplex on a single-family parcel, and on less than a single-family parcel for this district. And it got me going back to the, first to the OSI manual, which quotes the statute, which governs what we do here. And under 674-33-4A, the granting of a special exception has to be in accordance with the general or specific rules contained in the ordinance. And of course, part of what we've been, going back and forth about is how closely we've come to that. But 8.1.1 of the ordinance is a special condition, so it's the land space requirements table is in Article 7, and that says you need the 2 acres. And then 8.1.1 is a special condition to create a duplex or a multifamily house, and that requires a parcel and a half,
Right.
basically 3 acres. And as I thought back to the history of the of 5.4, which is the special exception ordinance that we're dealing with, I was on the planning board at the time, and as I understand or recall the conversations, it was the owner, before 5.4, the owner of a parcel like this could do nothing with it without a variance. They would have to prove hardship in order to do anything at all with the parcel. And the planning board at that time looked at that and said, that's not really fair. There are these non-conforming lots that pre-existed our ordinance, forcing people to the ZBA to prove variance burdens the ZBA with either being too harsh or too lenient in granting variances. And so the planning board wanted to create a kind of a fair accommodation. But I don't think the planning board intended to create a windfall for landowners to do things that couldn't otherwise be done. And so as I look at the requirements, neither the planning board nor the ZBA can waive the requirements of the ordinance. And the requirement of the ordinance, and so as I look at 5.4, it's relief from the dimensional requirements of Article 7, and it imposes the extra conditions under 11.3.4, I guess, that we've been citing and discussing. But I don't think that it provides relief from the special conditions. And I guess I want to give you a chance to respond to that line of analysis, because for me, it's going to change. Last month, when we looked at this initially, I said, yeah, it looks like you meet all of the requirements. But now I look at it, and I look at the cases, just also to give you a chance to respond. In the case of a request for special exception, the ZBA may not vary or waive any of the requirements set forth in the ordinance, and it cites Tidd versus Alton, Precinct of Haverhill Corner, and New London Land Use Association versus New London Zoning Board. So it's clear that 5.4 gives you some relief.
Right.
And it gives the landowner the relief to build a house there. But I don't know that it creates relief from the special conditions of 8.1, which says, so if you want to create a duplex, now you've got to meet additional requirements under the ordinance.
Right, so the, there's always a distinction between a non-conforming lot and the setback requirements. So for instance, side, rear yard and all that. So this meets all the setback requirements. So if you look at your conditions of your special exception, it's that we meet all setbacks for the use. Doesn't talk about the land. The land is created by definitions of what you use. In this zone, a duplex is permitted with a certain amount of front land. In this instance, this special exception is unique because it's not to vary a setback. It's to vary or to allow a building on a non-conforming lot. So if the use is permitted, but for a certain amount of size, that's when you talk about a non-conforming lot versus the restrictions on the use itself. So in my sense of looking at this, the lot size is defined. And let's say we were doing a single family. That lot size would be defined as well. This is a permitted use, so it creates a nonconformity, a nonconforming lot. The special exception doesn't deal with setbacks or any of these issues or septic or anything. It only deals with allowing construction on a non-conforming lot. So with this use, this becomes a non-conforming lot. So then the safety valve, if you will, is knowing that this is a non-conforming lot for this intended use, do you meet everything else? For instance, in the requirements, do you meet the setbacks? Yes, we do. Do you meet the other requirements? Water and sewer. Do you meet the other requirement? Go to the planning board and make sure it's an appropriate location for this use. This is the use that was proposed. It wasn't single family. Keep in mind a broader context. This is 2 lots. We're, I think, in collaboration, and maybe the adage of no good deed goes unpunished, we're taking those and saying, we'll put these together. But they are existing non-conforming lots. We're trying to make them more non-conforming.
Less non-conforming.
I mean, excuse me, less,
More conforming.
more conforming is what I meant to say. Right, so, that's how this ordinance deals with this type of special exception. You can have special exceptions for other things. This one allows a permitted use where you don't have enough lot size. That's what this request is all about. We want to do a permitted use on a piece of land that isn't big enough, according to the ordinance. That means it's a non-conforming lot for that use. So this request is because we don't conform to that. But in doing so, it asks to make sure that you conform to setbacks, water, health, safety, all those things that I think we proved we could do. And again, I reflect on the planning board looking at and being charged under your ordinance with that determination that this is an appropriate location for that use, which they did. And they unanimously decided that it was.
Thanks for your response. Other questions from the board? Where I gave the applicant an opportunity to put additional evidence and comment into the record, are there any abutters or residents that want to provide additional insight or input to the board? And if you could just state your name,
Okay, Tony McClendon.
Mr. McClendon.
How many units per side? Has that been determined yet?
It's a duplex.
So 2 families, 1 family for each
How
side.
many bedrooms per side, roughly?
2 bedrooms for each side.
It's like
Okay.
3.
I mean, I get what they're trying to do. The town of Rollinsford, if there's children living here, have to pay for the schooling, where the owner just makes money off the property, excuse me. I'd like that to be brought up also. Pardon me, I'm a little nervous, but.
Take your time, that's all right.
But, it's not, excuse me, inherited property. This is something they bought recently. We knew the zoning, 2 acres. I just don't feel it's appropriate to, put a duplex there.
Thank you, Mr. McLendon. Other comments or input from the public?
I just want to add that when we were considering the 2 single families, the direction from that planning board and Mr. Krebs was to try and focus on a duplex. So I'll go back to my adage of no good deed goes unpunished. We're trying to take 2 lots that have constitutional rights and merge them into 1 lot. We're making a better situation. We can go back to the drawing board and look at what we can otherwise do. It wasn't this applicant or this owner, but I know there was plans for some potential commercial use at one point. I think it was storage or maybe it was something else. And I was reminded, I think, by the applicant that the planning board or whatever board it was suggested that this should be residential use. So this is a dovetail of a lot of effort to do what the town was looking for. It's not an overburden. These are 1,120 square feet. That's 2,200 square feet of housing. This is combined less than a typical single-family house that we built, particularly in Rollinsford. These houses are now built 25, 27, 3,000, 3,500. This is 22,000 square feet of living space. This is an effort by an applicant coming to you to say, I'm trying to respect what the town otherwise wants. The town wants you to stay away from the wetlands. The town wants you to stay away from a generous buffer. The town wants you to get DES approval. And this is a modest plan. You could look at it and say this is not, but you'd have to tell me that 2,200 square feet of living space is overburdening what really is 2 legal lots. I don't think it is. I don't think that's reasonable. I think this plan is reasonable not only because it looks reasonable, and it probably, and I think it is, but it's the suggestion of a lot of input from the town. So I again think that the relief that's being requested is to allow us to build on a non-conforming lot. To do that, you have an unusual process, one that doesn't exist in other towns. You send us to the planning board for their reasoned, considered opinion on that. They unanimously have suggested that this is reasonable. That carries a lot of weight, in my opinion. And it was a bigger project, in essence. It was a bigger garage and a bigger driveway. So we really are scaling it down from what was originally proposed as requested. They're the ones that make that determination. You make kind of other ones. I look at this as you look to see that our setbacks are met, we have water supply, we have all that. We have septic, that's gonna be DES approved. We meet this buffer, that's another thing you look for. The other thing you added was things as a courtesy we listened to and we put on the plan. Chain link fence, a buffer line for the trees, a smaller unit. We did that. So if we can't get an approval because we listened to everything, not only you, but your planner and the planning board asked us to do, I don't know how that could be considered reasonable. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr.
I have something to say. With all due respect to the planning board,
I certainly, if I was sitting on that board, I would never have approved this, because I don't think it's a proper use of the land. I'm very concerned with the fact that we're taking two non-conforming lots and making it a larger non-conforming lot.
Well, it's less
It-
conforming.
Well,
I mean, more
it-
conforming, excuse me.
It's a little more conforming, but it still is, it's only half of what we require in that area
Well,
for a single
I don't mean
family
to
home.
interrupt you, but you'd be surprised what is out there for non-conforming lots. This is not, you're not ending up with a postage stamp. But go to this community and other communities, and they're called postage stamp lots. And they're non-conforming, and they're allowed to be built on. You don't even wanna know what to do in Portsmouth, but
Well,
even,
With all due respect to you,
Yeah.
Mr. Newton, I appreciate what you're saying, but, and we can't really compare ourselves with Portsmouth. I
I'm
mean, we're-
referring to land here as well.
Okay, I'm sure we do have a lot of non-conforming lots, and we'll take them up as the board or whatever will pick them up at the appropriate times. However, when we're talking about this one, the egress onto Oak Street is less than sufficient, in my opinion. You have, two-family home there, with the potential of having 4 additional cars coming out onto Oak Street. It's a horrible street to begin with. You're right near the railroad trestle. If there was an accident with people coming out there in the winter and stuff, where are they gonna go? I mean, it's,
I can respond to that. This access driveway has been used repeatedly by the other people who have rights to it without incident that we're aware of. And, you know, this consideration is really not in front of the board. And I understand what you might have said if you were on the planning board, but they have unanimously said this is an appropriate location for the use. And I'm not trying to say that to kind of stifle anyone. We listened to what you said in terms of, you know, this, make this smaller, let's go with the fence. We've done that. So I'm not saying, hey, forget it, we're not listening to you. In fact, the opposite, we did. But if I look at it kind of in context, they're over here doing what they did, and this board is charged with looking at the other criteria that we think we've met. So I think the applicant is doing that with due respect not only to this board, but to the planning board, and came up with a really good plan. Again, this has been in existence for decades without incident, and so
and what's the traffic light like on that right away now? What is,
well, I drive it, it seems to be okay, but, you know, I mean, I'm not supposed to be doing a traffic study for a special exception. So the criteria, you know, for
and I
this
rode down
case.
that road and several times this past month to find out what it was like. The traffic is very heavy. There's very little chance of stopping, especially at this point, if somebody is pulling out in front of you, because there is a slight curve there. I'm worried about what it would be like in the wintertime with the snowbanks. The railroad trestle is not far from there. There's no place for people to go if someone goes.
The railroad trestle, you mean the railroad line?
The bridge is not far from there.
Or what, I mean, does that
Isn't that-
affect traffic? It's just a
Well,
road.
I know, but I mean, it's not like they can pull over. I mean, if somebody pulls out, there's like very little chance for someone to pull over.
Well, actually, I disagree. I think the visibility is excellent here, and I
I
think if
didn't
you,
find that to be true.
well, nonetheless, I mean,
Yeah.
that's not why we're here. I mean, I'm not trying to be flip about it either, it's just not why we're here.
I
I think it's a safety concern.
I think it's a
That's your
very big
concern.
safety concern, and I am not in favor
You want
of
to do a
that.
traffic study?
Well, if I may. So, FX asked about a traffic study, so I can tell you what the traffic study would say. And it's this type of housing, and I wanted to mention this a little bit earlier in FX's presentation. When we originally looked at, let's just take a step back, when we originally looked at that, we have two lots of record. So by general right, we would have 2 single-family homes. 2 single-family homes from a if you look at a snapshot of housing today, they generate more children, they generate more traffic from the ITE standpoint than the proposed housing stock that we're showing here, and there's a reason for that. Most people that move into this style housing stock versus two single-family homes are a generation different. So my generation and younger, we are looking for this type of housing. We either have one small child or no children, and by the time that we have more and we're stepping on more Legos and kicking more blinking, dancing toys, we want to move to a single-family home. So, and the discussion with the planning board was mostly impact to the land, but I think inadvertently we got to a housing stock that generates in total less children, less actual human behavior and impact on the land, but to your question specifically, less traffic. The ITE manual says that on average a single-family home generates about 9.4 vehicle trips per day. On average, a duplex or townhouse-style structure generates far less than that. It's about 5 trips per day. So, to your point, we're actually generating less trips to and from Oak Street than we would if we had the two single-family homes. Now, I understand that the consideration is what happens when you're sitting here looking left or right, and the other thing that we find is that there's progression in how traffic moves. So traffic on Oak Street will likely move to and from the, I guess this is east and west, and so that type of traffic is trying to find the closest corridor to, in the morning, to work, and in the afternoon from work. And so what you're going to find is in this particular location that there's kind of a split. I would think that most of the traffic in the morning is actually going to be heading east so that we can head down to 4 and then down to Portland Street to jump on the highway. But then you have probably a 40% split that would head to Broadway for the same reasons. So as you're sitting here and you're generating maybe 1 or 2 trips from the total development in the morning, one of those trips is going to head left and one of those trips is going to head right. In the afternoon, there's a much larger derivation of when people come home, but most people, when they're approaching home, would pick a route on their way back to their project site or back to their home that would require more right-hand turns than left-hand turns for the very reason that you're discussing. So traffic in a lot of ways is like water, it finds its equilibrium. And so if you are a resident here and you find that because Broadway and 4 are essentially the easiest path, an equal path to and from your destination, you would likely take 4 back to the project, our project site, so that you could take a right-hand turn into the site. When we're looking at general safety, there's no large grade change between here and the bridge. As you're sitting in the driveway, you can see well across the full top of the bridge, and then there's sight distance well beyond the next driveway as you're looking to the east. As you're traveling to and from and along the corridor, there's open sight distance along the corridor also, and there's a large open area here at the front of the site for your left and right-hand turns. So, though we haven't done an actual traffic study, as FedEx pointed out, that's not something that we would really look at doing as part of a project like this, but we do have quite a bit of experience in that area.
Mr. Berry, other questions from the board?
I just want to, maybe I'm going over something that is a basic question that I'm getting more confused as this goes along. So, Bruton, can you answer this for me? If your client wanted to, could he build 2 single-family homes on those 2 non-conforming lots?
The ordinance does say, as we are here for this project, that if they're non-conforming, that we would have to go to get a special exception for both of those uses as well.
Okay.
And by the way, that's how we started. And we were asked to kind of go in this direction. And that's, to me, the hardest part of this. That's what we were originally asking. And Mr. Travis,
board is burdened by this public deliberations aspect, and I don't resent having to deliberate in public, but it's very difficult for us as we're learning our way into this ordinance and into this process. And I want to make it as comfortable as I can for, like if Mr. Hinsman and I are struggling, my colleagues on the board are also struggling. They're working hard to understand a very complex set of zoning laws at the state level and zoning ordinances at the local level, and overlay it onto land use. So at the risk of, at some point I need to bring this hearing to a close so we can deliberate. But for the other members of the board, do you understand this conversation we're having? Mr. Turgeon buys 2 parcels of land. He could, neither parcel of land is a conforming lot. So the owner of Lot A and Lot B could come to this board and ask for a special exception, pick Mr. Turgeon and Mr. McClendon, right? They can each come into the board and ask for a special exception to build a house on Lot A and Lot B.
Except it's not large enough according to the,
That's why you asked for the special exception.
That's why they can
That's the
have a
whole
special
purpose of
exception.
that.
Those, they're not,
but I don't,
But
Yeah,
they have
no,
to meet, they have to meet certain
I'm sorry,
criteria for that special exception.
they have to meet criteria for the special exception, but those criteria are set back and get water and get,
Right, so meet
The-
setbacks without encroaching on
Safe.
wetlands, et
And-
cetera.
and there should be a safe.
well, eventually they need to get a variance. Unless the town buys the parcel, it can't say to a landowner, you can't use the parcel.
Right.
Okay? And so what Mr. Bruton is explaining is that they came in originally to get 2 separate houses. They talked to Mr. Krebs, who encouraged them to merge the lots and look, instead of building 2 different houses, to build a single duplex on the parcel. So that's,
So a plan was presented to the planning board for 2 separate homes. There was actually a plan. I'd like to see that. Do you have that, Mr. Berry?
Did they pass it?
No, I don't have
It
that.
didn't-
I
it
can.
was a concept.
it was-
Uh,
yeah.
But a
no,
plan
it-
was
it
provided
it was-
with-
It was much further along than a concept. So the existing boundary line is here. And we showed a single-family home here that met setbacks. A sewage disposal system up in this area here. And then this lot has a front setback like this, and we were proposing a structure that sat something like this, and a driveway that came in this area here, and then we were proposing a sewage disposal system outside the required state setback. So what this did is we went to the planning board essentially for 2 topics. We were asking for a special exception, and we knew that they needed to weigh in on the special exception. But also, we were asking the planning board for what's known as a conditional use permit. And when you are encroaching inside of the buffers in the town of Rollinsford, the planning board gets to weigh in on whether you're doing that appropriately and you meet certain criteria there. And so, when we got to the planning board, essentially we were asked if we would consider smashing these together and doing the development outside of the lower section, and that would compact the project site and reduce overall impact as we've demonstrated. So it was much more than a concept. We've spent quite a bit of engineering time on making sure that something like that was viable.
okay, other questions?
Yeah, is it recited somewhere? I don't see anywhere noted on here that these are 2-bedroom dwellings.
In the petition that they sent to us, it said 2 to 3 bedrooms.
Yeah, it did say 2 to
2
3,
to
so.
3 bedrooms.
Well, as a condition of approval, we can certainly agree that they should be limited to 2 bedrooms. And we can add it to the plan.
Other questions from the board? No? Mr. Hinsman.
I have a question, Charlie. I just doing my thinking aloud here. So I am a less sure of myself than when I came in here. When I came in here, I thought that my understanding was, with a special exception, if you, with a non-conforming lot, you ask for the waiver of the setbacks, and if the, it was otherwise a permitted use, and it met the water and sewer, then the real issue that the board is identifying for me is 11322, which is the public safety of the, you know, the entrance into the ingress and egress. But you brought up something, and I was looking over your shoulder and read it, which confuses me a bit, because what you were reading to me seemed to indicate that we could look, if you would, almost a little bit beyond this, and you were talking about whether or not what you were reading the OSI indicated that this had to meet the requirements for duplex as well. So I'm sort of caught up on that and confused by that. So that's what I'm hung up on is.
That was my struggle, John, from the last meeting, that, you know, when I had done my research, that 8.1.1 was not being met, that it's essentially, they are taking two non-conforming lots, but in my mind, it is becoming a more non-conforming lot because of the duplex itself. In Rollinsford, a lot, if it's a duplex, it's 1.5 times the land plus 300 feet of frontage. So I was hung up on that as well, and that, I still see that as an issue, as well as safety. I do think the safety is a concern. With all due respect to Mr. Berry, you speculated about the traffic. I've lived here for 27 years, I'm well aware of the traffic on Oak Street. It's very intensive, it's not just 2 times a day, that is a very highly traveled road. And the Jersey barrier, I'm not sure what the term is, it goes right to where this driveway is gonna be. So visually, viewing to the right is very difficult to see oncoming traffic, because there is a crest to the bridge and the approach to this driveway, and then it drops down. So I do have concerns regarding safety, and I do believe they are very valid concerns.
And I also agree with that.
I don't think I have anything to add. Like Mr. Hinton, I'm conflicted about how 8.1 applies. Catch up. You want to make any final comment, Mr. Bruton?
Why don't you make that point, because you have the expertise.
Sure. So, the discussion here at the board is the overall impact. And so, if you were to make a distinction between a single-family home on this lot versus a duplex, from a traffic safety standpoint, this is almost equal to that. So if we were to look at, if we just looked at one lot and we asked for a single family home on the front lot, on an average daily basis, the traffic impact from one single family home is about the same as what we're proposing here. So I understand your point that I speculated because I haven't run traffic numbers, right? I don't have traffic counts. But I was on the survey field crew that stood in this intersection and witnessed the vehicles coming through here. So it's not that I have never been to this site before. I also travel this to and from meetings here at the town on a regular basis. So I do understand this site, and I do understand this intersection, and I'm not downplaying the total volume that is on Oak Street itself. But I guess from a traffic standpoint and a safety standpoint, the number of trips coming to and from this proposed duplex versus a single-family home is almost identical.
Thanks. And Mr. Berry, I'm gonna weigh in just a little bit. The board does defer to your expertise in terms of, you know about, on average, how many trips in and out of a duplex there are during a day. And I don't think the board has special expertise. I think that what Ms. Rallo and Ms. Cass are talking about is the traffic on Oak Street. And I'm not sure that we've been clear that part of their concern is about the, and I don't want to read into it, but it's my understanding is that they're concerned about the heavy traffic on Oak Street, not so much on your ability to speak knowledgeably about the number of average daily trips in and out of a duplex. But we appreciate the clarification, thanks. Again, I want to be fair to everybody, give everybody a say before we close the public hearing and go into deliberations again. Ready? So, Mr. Turgeon, Mr. Bruton, Mr. Berry, thank you. Members of the public, thank you. Well, this closes the public hearing. We're in public deliberations. I believe there was a motion on the floor at the time that we recessed, a motion on the floor to deny the application. So I don't think that motion has been withdrawn. I think it's back on the floor. So we're in deliberations. Anybody have any comments?
Well, what I go back to is the fact that we have non-conforming lots, we're looking for a variance, right?
No, we're looking for a special exception.
Well, it's a special exception. And it seems that our rules for duplexes don't really fit into this either.
All right.
I'm still confused on 8.1 and, but I'd like to hear what other people say.
And the board hates me, I think, because I wait.
No, I'm fine, I've pretty much made mine, so I have nothing
I want
further
to
to
be
say.
deferential to the other
Yeah, I
members of the
understand.
board, so.
Yep, I understand.
Do you want to go? Or you want me to go?
Go ahead.
All right. So, like Mr. Hinsman, I'm going back and forth about 8.1. I think what changes my mind back again is the fact that it is 2 lots that are being joined. So, under the ordinance as I've known it for 30 years or so living here, the owner of a parcel, the town can't deny the owner of a parcel a reasonable use of the parcel. And if we were meeting this on a variance request, 2 separate owners of those 2 separate non-conforming lots would have very strong cases for a variance, because they would, like, the basic paradigm for local zoning is to build a house on a piece of land if you own the piece of land. And whether you're, and here I do part company from some people in town, I hear people say, you know, developers aren't entitled to the same rights as a private landowner, and that's just not the law. The law is, we treat Mr. Turgeon fairly, we treat somebody who's lived in this town for 80 years fairly. The same laws apply, the same rules apply. We can't discriminate against Mr. Turgeon because he purchased it to make, you know, an economic decision. And so, even though I disagree with Mr. Bruton, this isn't a special exception for a use. This is a special exception on dimensions. The use of a duplex is permitted in the countryside residential, but that particular use is subject to the special condition in 8.1. And I'm not convinced entirely that we have the right to waive that. But I'm also convinced that that I'd much rather see this development than see two separate standalone single houses on two different parcels there. And the landowner has that right. Unless this town is ready to buy the land from them, this town can't tell a landowner not to use their land. That's not what the ordinance was there for. So, on balance, reluctantly, I would vote to grant this. Not because I agree with the use argument, but because I would defer to the planning board's finding that not enforcing the 8.1 in this particular circumstance is better than having two detached, single-family houses on those parcels. Sorry for the long explanation, but there it is. Ms. Rallo, go ahead.
I am not voting for it, that's it.
Ms. Gass?
I'm struggling with this, as you all know. I'm of the belief that if the applicant could do two single-family homes on these parcels, he would. I'm hung up on the safety concern. For me, that's a big sticking point. I don't think that they have met that requirement of the special exception. I mean, I do think that it is detrimental. I do agree that the decreasing, I'm actually leaning a little more towards granting it. However, I would be remiss to not say that I would want the two-bedroom limitation and also a height on the fencing. I also think it's a safety concern with that slope. Again, I'm familiar with the property. The slope does go down to the railroad tracks. So I guess I'm looking for some guidance from my fellow members to maybe push me a little more towards that, but I guess I can be convinced that.
I think it's truly a safety issue.
Mr. Hinsman?
I'm not against, by the way, voting against my vote on the planning board. I think that this Charlie, you and I are, and Attorney Bruton are in law, which the adversarial process brings out truth, and I think that this has been much more fleshed out here than in the planning board. Having said that, we have a very experienced planning board, technical advisor by the name of John Krebs, who this passed muster with, and I put a lot of faith in his expertise. I did look at the house on the other side of the trestle. That's a similar distance in my mind. It's a single-family home that was built not too long ago. The home was damaged to the street. It probably has a little bit better visibility because you're not coming down the hill. But I'm not aware of any accidents there. And so while I am not excited about this, I'm looking at that unless someone can convince me that 8.1 applies, then I am going to reluctantly vote to approve the special exception. That's where I think I've settled out tonight.
And as well, I'll give you a chance to weigh in on safety. I guess, Andrea, what I would say on safety is I do understand the concern that Oak Street is congested, particularly at some times of day that would make that difficult. What I would be relying on Mr. Berry's representations that a duplex generates fewer, let's see, that one duplex generates fewer average daily trips than two single-family houses would. I think in terms of sightline, I think everybody has raised good concerns, just from the standpoint that think you and Ms. Rollo have emphasized that there's a lot of traffic there. It sometimes moves fast, it's sometimes hard for somebody, particularly in a hurry, coming out of that driveway throat. It could be, it can be a little dicey, particularly if you have to get across traffic. On the other hand, from the safety standpoint, I'm persuaded that the applicant really has done a nice job, and I appreciate their effort. You know, we were worried about the access to the railroad, there's a fence. We were worried about some other characteristics of the parcel, and they changed their design to meet some of our concerns. And so from that standpoint, I am persuaded that it is about as safe as they could make it, and that they listened to our concerns carefully.
I agree about the fencing.
So I guess that's where I come down on safety. I know that leaves us with the, it does leave us with the, as Mr. Hinsman calls it, an unhappy choice. The proposal doesn't thrill me, but I like it better than 2 single-family houses, I guess. I'm sorry, I can't be more persuasive. Ms. Rollo, do you want to weigh in on safety?
No,
Does Ken have anything? Do you have anything?
On safety, no.
Okay.
So I think we're ready for a vote. The motion is to deny, and so if that motion fails, we can consider a motion to grant, but the question, so a yes vote is to deny the application, a no vote is to we'll stay and talk some more about whether or not there's a way to grant grant the special exception. So, are we ready for the vote?
Again, Charlie, explain the yes and the no. Yes is to deny.
Yes is to deny,
Okay.
and no is to, you know, we could at that point entertain a motion to approve it with conditions. Does everybody understand what we're voting for? So, those in favor of denying, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed to denying, please say no, and I would be a no.
I'm a no.
Okay, so the motion to deny fails, and so now we would need a motion to approve. And is there somebody who would make that motion?
I make a motion to approve with conditions.
Okay.
I would like there to be a height on the fencing, that's noted.
I think it's 6 feet.
Is it 6 feet?
Yeah.
That's,
on the
I thought you said 4 feet. So I'm comfortable with the 6-foot fence
Okay. And the 2-bedroom limit.
and the 2-bedroom limit.
pretty.
Correct.
I will second the motion. Unless someone else wants to add conditions.
No. So, we are in discussion on the motion to approve, and I don't want to be premature, but we hashed it out. Ms. Rollo? anything
Nope,
you'd
I'm
like
done.
to- You done?
I'm done.
Ms. Cass?
I'm good.
Good. So we're ready for a vote. A yes vote to approve with conditions is just that, to approve with condition, and a no vote is to deny the special exception. Those in favor of the motion to approve signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, and those opposed?
No.
No. So by a vote of 3 to 2, and we'll get an order out to summarize what we've done.
And we do appreciate everyone's considered efforts. I know it's a difficult case. Certainly appreciate everyone's input. Thank you.
I want to thank the board. I know that we've worked hard on this one, and I appreciate everyone's willingness to hang in there on it. Thank you, members of the public, and Mr. Turgeon, Mr. Berry, and Mr. Rutan. Thank you. That, I'll take a motion to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn. Seconded.
and it's non-debatable. Those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you all very much.